everyone. I'm Erin Green from Pax Christi International, and I'm happy to bring you yet another interview in our series with young peace builders from around the world. And today we are visiting with our friends and members in England and Wales. And we have with us Aisling Griffin, the Schools and Youth Education Officer from Pax Christi, England and Wales. So welcome, Aisling. We're super happy to see you and to hear from you. And so maybe you can start off by telling us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Lovely to be here. So I'm Aisling. I work for Pax Christi, England and Wales. I'm from Northampton in England, which is in the centre. And I feel very lucky to be from here because I love walking and there's lots of really nice walks and countryside. So that's definitely a bonus.
That's wonderful. So how is it that you came to be part of the Pax Christi family? Tell us about your journey towards our international movement.
So it's slightly long and winding.
Perfect.
So I did some volunteering with the Salesians, Bosco Volunteer Action, and I did some time in Bolivia. And then when I came back through them, met the Columbans, the Columban Missionary Society, and they have a Justice and Peace Education Officer who kind of got me involved into his kind of youth network, so doing different kind of projects or kind of being part of some of the things they were doing. So they did things like prison visits, they invited young people along to Justice and Peace conferences, kind of different exposure and mission kind of experiences. And so through those things I met Pax Christi. Still didn't kind of immediately come into the family. I became a member, maybe not particularly active, but I also had some friends who were very much involved in kind of peace activism, and kind of through them I had my first experience going to the arms fair, or kind of demonstrating against the arms fair here in London, and then also through them kind of had different experiences, like going to Teze and being involved in different Teze events here in kind of the UK. And I think that helped form my kind of awareness of different peace issues, and kind of on a global perspective, but also on a very local perspective as to what kind of things are happening in England and Wales, with kind of lots of different levels of violence and peace work. So eventually I then heard of the job that was going, that is now my role, and I thought actually that sounds a very exciting thing to be doing, so I decided to apply, and here I am 2 years later.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about your job, but I have a follow-up question. I heard you mention Bolivia. How long were you there, and what kind of work were you doing there?
So I was there for 6 months, and I was working at it's kind of a children's home. So I worked with the very little ones in the kind of nursery, and then I'd help with their kindergarten as well in the afternoons. And yeah, it was a really, I think, formative experience in terms of just being in a place where on the one hand I knew absolutely nobody, but was very kind of welcomed into this bigger extended family, and the idea that actually it didn't matter that I was from somewhere very different. I think as people, those kind of basic needs, those emotions, those feelings, you know, it's the same wherever you are, kind of thing. Right. And yeah, that was a very eye-opening experience in some ways. Yeah.
Ah, it sounds very cool. And the little ones kind of speak a universal language anyway, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You know when they're not happy, you know when they are. So, yeah.
It's kind of a nice honesty that we unfortunately lose as we grow up. Now, you're working as the Schools and Youth Education Officer, and this is a bit of a perfect fit because tell us what you studied in school.
So I originally studied languages, and then decided that I wanted to go into teaching. So I did my kind of teacher training here, and then taught for a few years in schools. So yeah, it did kind of bring those two kind of elements, I suppose, of my life together, that interest in kind of peace work and that interest in education. And so it's just a really fortunate and welcome fits, I think.
Mhm. And so when you joined Pax Christi, England and Wales, what did you find? Like, how did you start to develop the role? What kind of need did you see for this kind of work? And why did you think it was important to focus on education, peace education, basically?
So I was very fortunate when I came into the role that it had been a focus of Pax Christi, England and Wales for many, many years. It was already very well established, so it meant I was kind of able to fit into a niche that was already here. But I think we, as a country, there's maybe not so much of a discussion about what peace is and kind of what we might need to do to build peace. And I think that in schools, that's a really key place for that kind of those discussions to be had and a safe place for it to be had, to really develop that kind of critical thinking and, sort of character, we call it in some ways. I'm not always sure I like that word, but, discussing those kind of values and what kind of world you want to live in. And sort of peace education, I think, is something that isn't necessarily the most mainstream kind of discussions. It's not necessarily the most mainstream ideas, but it's something that does exist. It is there and it's kind of growing, and I think it's a really important way to kind of start a broader discussion in society, to start in schools and kind of hopefully go outwards.
In my experience in working in the peace movement and meeting a lot of young people through this kind of work, my impression is that a lot of young folks these days are clearly very passionate about issues like climate change, racial justice, gender justice. They're very, very committed to many things that fall under the really big umbrella of social justice. But I have the impression that a lot of young people don't necessarily see the connection to these topics as peace issues. So they don't see climate justice as peace building, for example. Is this something that you're experiencing when you work with the young folks in school?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of, I don't know whether it's a human thing that we like things kind of clearly categorized,
right?
Or, I think sometimes when you talk about peace, it's sometimes people find it difficult to define, or it can start to sound quite controversial. We do campaigns around sort of nuclear weapons and the arms trade, and I don't think those are always comfortable conversations. And not that climate change is a particularly kind of comfortable conversation to be having,
right?
But I think everybody kind of looks at it and goes, oh well, obviously the climate is something that is important. We need our earth, we need to care for it, and I just think that kind of peace issues seem maybe harder to directly link when actually there are so many kind of overlapping issues and interconnectedness that actually people who are working on those, as you say, social justice issues really are peace building, but just don't quite define it in that way. And I don't know whether it's the language maybe isn't there, or just as a society maybe it makes us feel a bit more uncomfortable when you start going about peace campaigners. It seems a bit maybe it seems old-fashioned. I don't know. You think back to kind of nuclear disarmament and those kind of early days of that. I think there's a whole what, and I feel I'm getting myself caught up in a kind of web of reasons why. But, I think there are many reasons why, but I think it's starting to build that kind of language and that recognition of how everything is so interconnected, and kind of what those things are that can help us kind of see that and frame it in a more peace building way.
Sounds great. So what were some of the concrete activities that you did with the young people in the school settings before the pandemic? We'll talk about the current situation now, but tell us what you used to do.
So mainly my role involved going into schools on sometimes what they call off-curriculum days, where they would look at a certain issue, or kind of mission days when they'd be looking at more of maybe religious elements of their lives. And we do kind of workshops looking at things like conscientious objection, So the main thing we do there is go through a story of a conscientious objector and kind of imagine the young people in that role, and start to have that discussion as to kind of the reasons why not you might kind of conscientiously object. We talk about what is conflict. We did some sort of sessions looking at Israel-Palestine and kind of what's going on there, and we also look at kind of what is peace and what is peacemaking, and Christian peacemaking. And we'd kind of use a lot of discussion activities through that, because I think that's a really important way of starting to learn how to disagree in some ways, but also give your opinion. So that was some of the main work we do in schools, and then sometimes we'd also go in and do lessons in religious studies kind of classes, looking in and talking about what is Pax Christi and what is our work and why our work is important, particularly from that religious perspective.
So are you working only with Catholic students in Catholic settings, or do you also have to interpret this for ecumenical and even interfaith settings as well?
So I suppose Catholic schools are sort of niche, I suppose, in a way. It's kind of what we do, but even in Catholic schools, actually, you're not just talking to Catholics, you're not just talking to Christians. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of make that statement that actually it's everybody is involved in kind of peace work. It's not just one particular group and nobody else is allowed to, kind of thing. So yeah, we do predominantly work in Catholic schools, but within that environment is very diverse. And we have done work with schools and kind of other organisations who are kind of other denominations, secular kind of. So yeah, it does fit, I find, into many kind of different areas and different locations.
That's great. So stating the obvious, this year has been a bit of a surprise. It's, things are unpredictable, and it's been stop and start with the schools and lockdowns and all of these kind of things. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've adapted. And, I think older folks have this kind of myth about young people that they're super great with online stuff. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experience, about how your job has changed, and also about how the young people are doing in responding to this really unprecedented crisis that they've never experienced before.
Yeah, so part of my role was very easy to adapt. It was partly also just producing resources, which you can do in or out of a pandemic, I suppose. But also it's changed in terms of building networks more online. So kind of working with sort of teachers, particularly to support teachers at this time, and kind of having conversations about their work, but also trying to build kind of other sort of youth networks, maybe slightly older than schools, and trying to kind of bring people together and support them in exploring kind of what it means to be working for peace, what it means to be exploring for social justice. So we worked with another organisation to kind of do a weekend looking at the arms trade. We're kind of working with other networks again to sort of still stay involved and talking to young people. And I think it has been a time of I think creativity. I think you see people are starting to do videos, do podcasts, kind of using sort of social media for campaigning. So I think the campaigning can happen in so many different ways, and I think it already was in many ways, but the pandemic has, I think, brought it to light a bit more, all the different ways that people are campaigning and working and building networks. I like the word networks, but I think that's really important, that idea of us all working together, because we can't do it, we can't go it alone. Really, it's something that you do with others, and I think this has kind of really highlighted that as well.
That's great. So when you do work like you and I do, and the rest of the Pax Christi International movement, it's really work that sometimes takes decades to see progress. We see this, for example, with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that has just will come into force in January, and it's hard to see on a day-to-day basis, progress or advancement. And often it's the case where you see a lot more cause for concern. So when you look at your work and the ministry that you're doing, what for you kind of keeps you going? What do you think is a success? Like, is it, another young person joining Pax Christi International or going to a demonstration? Or for you, what's the spark that kind of fuels you a bit?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, things that you said are always great, when you kind of see a young person wanting to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also just, for me, I don't know whether it sounds a little bit too simple maybe, but just, when you see people start to kind of make those links between what you're talking about and kind of their life, actually where does that fit? What does that, how does that make me kind of question what I'm doing, question what I've done, and how will that make me hopefully change? I think just that, in some ways, just that when you see that light bulb moment, because that, at that point you've kind of planted the seed.
Right, right.
And again, it's kind of hard because you never quite know where that's going to go. But, when you do see it start to, people starting to come along to events or kind of ask questions or becoming more involved in things,
right.
Yeah, that does kind of keep you going a little bit. But I think there's always those discussions that you have with people where it's just, oh yeah, kind of, actually I see where that is, or even that, well, actually, why aren't people doing anything? And you're like, but we are, kind of thing.
right, yeah.
That moment of it kind of becoming a reality, I think is a really great moment that I really enjoy.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, and young people, I think, are so primed for empathy and for compassion, and I think that's really wonderful that you help make those connections in their own lives. So one of the reasons why we wanted to do these interviews was to really shine a spotlight on how young people are showing leadership and creativity within the movement right now to help us celebrate our 75th anniversary. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the big picture. So how do you think the peace movement as a whole can do better in encouraging young people to get involved and kind of take on the leadership roles that you've taken on in your own work?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's just acknowledging that young people are there. I think sometimes it's kind of it feels a little bit like them and us, and I think that's not
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think also recognizing the new ways in which young people are kind of working and not being kind of scared by that. I think you mentioned earlier about how young people seem very much involved in climate change and all kind of social justice things, and it doesn't seem so much peace. But I think actually a lot of young people are making those connections. They're just maybe not as obvious maybe as it has been in the past. So I think it's partly about just recognizing that young people are there, they are doing it, and but actually we also, it's great to hear what people have done in the past, whose kind of shoulders we're standing on, I suppose, in some ways, and kind of not being scared to kind of, for everybody to kind of reach out and have those conversations and support each other. I think we're in some ways, it sounds like people are speaking different languages, but actually it's all the same language, just sometimes in a very different kind of world and place. And so it's maybe starting to have those conversations to kind of start to realize that and see how different sides are coming for the same thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for making room in your life for one more Zoom call and for sharing your story with us. I think that, we can do so much more just to shine a spotlight on the great work that young people are doing and letting young people describe in their own terms what's important to them. And so we thank you for your generosity and for your commitment to Pax Christi, and also for helping us celebrate our 75th year. So we hope that 2021 will bring new opportunities and maybe fewer challenges. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the coming years.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been lovely, and good luck to yourself as well.
Okay. Thank you, Aisling. Talk to you later. Bye.